The name of the veteran we are interviewing is Robert Gilbert. He was born in Sacramento on November 14, 1931. He served in the Korean War with the U.S. Marine Corps. He reached the rank of corporal. This is being recorded in Davis, California on November 22, 2014. The people conducting this interview are Parker Russell, Reagan Campbell, and D'Artagnan Wells. This interview is being conducted for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress. So, could you please start off by explaining where you were born and sort of explaining your family's history?
I was born in Sacramento, California, moved to Woodland when I was in kindergarten, and remained in Woodland the rest of my life. My father worked at Epperson's. It was only the second job he ever had because he lost the first job during the Depression. My mother was a homemaker, never worked. I have a brother and a sister. Everybody in my family is deceased.
Okay. What caused you to join the war?
I haven't the slightest idea. I was going to college. A friend of mine stopped by. He was being drafted. Wanted me to just go down to the post office. It was the courthouse and such, and he didn't want to be alone. He wanted to join the Navy or something, the Air Force. They had a quota to fill, and they had already filled it. So we were walking out. We came by a Marine Corps office, and two Marines were in their dress blues and told us to take a test. And I said, no, I'm going to college. He took the test, and I took the test. I got 100%. I always felt that if you had an IQ of 0, you could get 100% on a Marine Corps test because they wanted warm bodies. Needless to say, they didn't have their quota, and I signed up. I had to go home and tell my parents that I had signed, and I had to quit college. So in December 1950, I was in the Marines.
How did your parents feel about you quitting college and joining?
Very, very sad.
Sad?
Very sad. I could have stayed in college. I was classified as 7A. I would have missed the whole war. And if war would have lasted longer, I would have been a lieutenant because I would have had a degree.
Okay.
Instead, I was a private, or PFC by that time.
So, when did you leave for training camp?
When did I
When did you depart to go start training for
go
the
to
war?
boot camp?
Yeah, boot camp.
And they let me have Christmas at home, so I left in January 1st.
Okay.
I went to San Diego to boot camp, where being raised very tenderly, I had the shock of my life because in those days the Marine drill instructor slapped you around. First thing you learned was when you got a gift from home, you had to put a bucket on your head and eat the whole gift. So everybody wrote right away, don't send me anything. Had little things like at 2 in the morning, they rousted you out of the rack and marched you out on the drill field by where the sand is and had you dig a grave 6 feet deep to bury a sand flea in a little match carton. By the time you got back to your bunk, why, it was all torn up, so you spent the rest of the morning cleaning it up, and by 5 or 6 you're out in the field training. The training was very strenuous.
Okay. Sorry, I forgot to go over. When you were growing up, what careers were you interested in?
What career?
Yeah.
I had several. I was going to be a teacher to start, and when I got into college, I was going to be an architect.
Okay. Did you have any previous members who were in family members who were in the military?
My father was in the Navy in World War I. He was sunk off the Rock of Gibraltar just at the end of the war. Picked up by a Japanese merchant ship. Ate nothing but boiled rice for 18 days until he got home. The funniest thing is when I got married, and the first dinner he had at our house, my wife made Spanish rice. My brother was a corpsman attached to Fleet Marine Force, Marine Corps. He was wounded in the Battle of the Philippines, Leyte. My stepfather-in-law was in the Army in the Battle of the Bulge. My wife's grandfather was sunk by the Germans in World War II. Her father was shot down by the Japanese and killed in World War II. He was a Canadian Air Force. He was loaned to the American Air Force.
So, when you were considering joining, when you went to the courthouse and you're with your buddy, did you think back to like all your family members or the
No.
people you knew?
Never gave it a thought.
You just signed up?
Well, for
Or
one
you
thing,
took the test?
I really didn't know about all this at the time.
Okay.
My dad never spoke about his Navy career. I know that he was in Paris because he had a souvenir sailor's French hat. I never talked to my brother much, and he never mentioned things, and I didn't read ribbons in those days, so I didn't know he had a Purple Heart. And of course, we just didn't talk about it.
Okay. So after training camp, you went over to Korea. What was sort of the first things that you saw or you did there?
Well, training camp lasted quite a while. I went through boot camp, then into infantry training camp,
Okay.
and I missed the ship, the 9th draft going to Korea, so I was put in for a month of guerrilla training, learn how to eat bugs and snakes and things that weren't pleasant. When I hit Korea, we landed in Busan, and I was quite surprised. My brother was there from Japan. He's a chief petty officer in the Navy corpsman. How he got there, I don't know. So I took my rifle, helmet, and pack off. We went for a walk. When I came back, the rest of the guys had been shipped already. So you don't get to see much of Busan. I was put in a truck and taken up to the lines, where we were assigned to either take a guy that was lucky enough to come home or a guy that had died, and there was a vacancy. So the unit that we went over with, we never saw again. We were split up, and I think you notice that a lot of service people in the other wars have unit to go see reunions. Well, in the Marine Corps infantry that we were in, we had Charlie Company reunions, and I went to one in San Francisco and one in South Carolina, and I didn't know anybody. And very strange to go to a reunion and they just weren't with the unit. I don't know what else you want to know about that.
Okay. So to go back to your experience with boot camp, did you expect it to be different?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I thought maybe it'd be like West Point or some of the other things. I didn't know it would be quite so rough. But looking back, I can see why it was that rough. Not only was it rough, in 1950 we were caught short by the Korean War, so there wasn't much to eat. You'd march into the mess hall and you'd get one hot dog and some potatoes and only coffee. And I learned to drink coffee. It was coffee or nothing, or water.
What did you feel was most difficult for you personally at boot camp?
Taking the strict orders, learning to mind without thinking. That's what they trained you to do. You take an order, you don't ask a question, and I was always curious.
Okay. So did you understand why the instructors would be telling you to do certain things or would be treating you the way they did?
At the time, no. Later on, I realized why.
So you were in infantry. Did you have to learn any special skills other than basic training specific for infantry?
I learned how to fire an M1. I learned how to field strip it. In guerrilla training, they blindfolded you and you put your rifle together by just feeling, because if you're in combat and the rifle jammed, you've got to field strip it, you've got to clean it, and get it back together. And if it's nighttime, you've got to do it in the dark. If you dropped your rifle, you field stripped it and you slept on it that night. That taught you not to drop your rifle. You're taught that your rifle is your lifesaver. Without that, you're no good. You you won't live very long.
So what else did you do during guerrilla training? Was it just
I learned how to fight with a knife, fight with a hatchet, hand-to-hand combat, Japanese deathlock to break your neck, what to eat to survive, whether you like it or not, how to stay awake for 24 hours, no sleep, how to walk for 24 hours or hike. Mostly survival.
Okay. So after you completed boot camp and guerrilla training, and you went over to Korea.
Went to tent camp from boot camp.
Okay.
That was the infantry training.
Okay, tent camp. What was the did you stay in Busan for a while after you arrived?
No.
Or did you be shipped off?
I shipped out that day, went into Busan, saw my brother, was shipped up by truck to the lines. We were separated and assigned to different companies.
Okay. Was this before or after the Operation Chromite, or when the U.S. attacked Anchorage?
No, this is when I first got to Korea.
Okay. So after you were shipped off, what were the things that you did after? So you arrived in Busan, and then you're shipped off. What sort of things did you do after you were shipped and arrived in your new camp?
You were assigned to a unit, and you went to your foxhole or your bunker,
Okay.
and you met a few people. Luckily, we had some veterans from World War II that had experience in combat. You're set up with 3 light 30 machine guns with a 50 at each end, 50 caliber machine gun at each end. You're assigned a foxhole, and your duty is to protect the machine gunner mostly. That's if the enemy is coming at you. Otherwise, you see your sergeant coming, you know you're going to go out on patrol that night, so you walk through your own minefield, through their minefield, depending on what type of a patrol you're on, whether it's a reconnaissance patrol, you try and be as quiet and sneaky as you can to find out where the Chinese or the North Koreans are and try and get back alive and bring any of your wounded back and dead. If it's a combat patrol, you go out there. If it's in the snow, you lay in the snow. If it's in the dryness, you're lucky, you're warmer. Kill as many as you can. Try and get back through your own minefield as safe as you can.
What was it like in the foxholes?
Cold and wet. If you ever want to experience, go out in your backyard, dig a hole, and sit there and let it rain. See how miserable it is. When it snows, you try and pack the snow that you won't freeze to death. You try and protect your toes and your fingers as best you can so you won't lose them.
Okay.
You got to stay awake all the time that you can. You see bushes move, and after a while you learn that it's not somebody, it's a bush. Because if you fire at that bush, you're liable to get artillery in on you, sniper, grenade, anything.
Okay. Going back to when you arrived in Korea, what were you feeling? Were you anxious? Were you nervous?
Scared to death.
How did you deal with your emotion of being scared?
Not much you can do about your emotions. You can bite your tongue, because if you deserted, if you left your foxhole or your trench, you don't know where you are. You go back to where the artillery is, you'd be court-martialed. Sometimes that's tempting rather than staying on the lines. If you go forward, you might become a prisoner of war, which I can assure you it's miserable. There was 2 death marches that were never reported in the Korean War. They reported the death march in the Philippines in World War II, but there's 2 of them in the Korean War.
Okay. Do you know anybody who deserted?
No. I know a lot of guys that wanted to.
What can you explain more about these death marches?
I don't know much about it. I just read it in a Marine Corps journal.
Okay.
But they were captured, prisoners were captured. They're held in a prisoner of war camp, and I believe they were marched to Russia like some of the rest. But a lot of them were saved. A lot of them came back when they had the peace treaty.
Okay.
They went up to the Yalu River, I believe.
Do you know anyone who became a prisoner of war?
No.
That was captured? No?
No. My sister's boyfriend in World War II was. He was in the Philippines, though.
Okay. Going back to life in the foxholes, did anyone in your company get trench foot or frostbite?
Yeah.
While on patrol, you mentioned you didn't know where you were. How easy was it to get lost, and from there, how would you be able to get back?
You didn't know exactly where you were as far as naming some kind of a little village because there was no towns. You went out with a group and you went back with a group. You don't go very far away from your foxhole and your machine guns and such. You go out on patrol and you come back. I don't know how any of these people did get lost that claimed they were lost. I don't know. I always knew where my unit was.
Okay. So going back to when you were in training camp, you learned to not question orders. Did the training prepare you to do what was asked of you when you were in Korea?
By
Like going out on patrol and sorry, that I don't know where I'm going with that question.
you never question because the closeness that you have with your buddies, without your buddies, you may not live. So you have the same faithfulness or whatever it is to protect them as they have to protect you. I guess you don't really know, but you seriously believe that that guy is always there on your side.
Okay. So then, how do you, going back to like knowing that the person next to you is always going to be on your side, how would you feel if like a person that was close to you would abandon or be court-martialed for leaving his foxhole?
I never had that problem, but I would be thoroughly disgusted with him.
Okay. So when you were on patrol, what did you usually see?
Depending on whether it was a reconnaissance or combat.
Okay.
Reconnaissance, you have an assignment to find out what the enemy is doing without being shot or captured, and try to get the information back. And ambush, you just simply go out, try and hide and kill somebody, kill their patrol, because you know there's a patrol out there.
While going on a reconnaissance mission, has it ever changed into a combat situation?
Oh, sure. Yeah, if you get caught.
Have you ever been in one of those situations?
Of course.
What was that like?
Just as scary as can be. Although when it's happening, you don't think that much about it until you get back.
So while you were in Korea, what stages were you in? From beginning to end, and what did you see?
What did I see?
Okay. So like, what stage of the war did he come into? Or, see, I I believe you came into the beginning of the war, correct?
No,
Or
I wasn't
towards-
in the Chosin Reservoir retreat. I wasn't in that. I came after that.
Okay.
I was on the lines when they created the 38th parallel. We set up the line there
Okay.
to hold them back. So they attacked us, we attacked them constantly. We had outposts, we had to go out, try and get those outposts back. It'd be a fight. One night they'd get it, next night we would, depend on how many you killed and how you took it. I went from, in my year there, I did go from the east coast, and luckily, we were short of people when I first got there. After a couple of months, they brought more and more people in, and believe it or not, I had a chance to get out the infantry lines because I had driven a tractor when I was a kid here in Woodland. Being I drove a tractor, they had a shortage in the amphibious tractor battalion, so they pulled me off infantry and put me in as a driver of amphibious tractors. Now, being unlucky, as I always thought, the unit, the Marines, were pulled off the East Coast, and the Koreans were taken over there because they thought they were going to, the Chinese were going to invade Seoul again. So they reinforced the West Coast. We parked our tractors, gave us our rifles back, and we went back as infantry on the West Coast. We had to redig the foxholes and the bunkers because the Koreans are shorter than we are. We had to dig them deeper and reinforce them. That's why all I saw was the hills in the East Coast and the hills on the West Coast. I went through Incheon by train to get to the tractors, take the tractors up there. And I went through Seoul, and I left and came home out of Incheon. They came up one day and said, "Gilbert, you're going home." I grabbed my rifle and 3 clips of ammo, left everything else, and went to Incheon, where they took my rifle away from me, and I felt like I lost a buddy. I met 2 of the guys that I'd gone over with. Don't know what happened to the rest of them.
Okay. So, what are the amphibious tractors that you mentioned?
Oh, have you ever seen the infantry hit the islands in World War II, where the infantry gets into the back of the amphibious tractor and they make a circle, and they spread out, then go into the beach, drop the back, and the infantry goes out of the back end and attacks.
Okay.
World War II and World War One. No, not World War One. Not even Vietnam, I don't think.
Okay.
That's how MacArthur took Incheon and threw the Koreans back, because they had driven everybody clear off the peninsula, clear back to the Pusan perimeter, where we landed the troops to start fighting our way back up to the 38th parallel.
So you were part of the push back up to the...
Yes, back to the 38th. They were on the 38th by the time I got there.
Okay.
Just missed it, luckily. They had, forgot what the names of them are now.
So, how did you feel knowing that, like, out of the 70 or 60 so people that you arrived with, that only 3, including yourself, were left?
It's just glad that I survived. You come back with a guilt feeling that you did survive. That stays with you for a long time. You wonder why you made it and they didn't. I guess it always stays with you. Maybe it's just luck.
So, while you were in Korea, did you have any leave where you were able to go and contact home, or?
No. Being while I was there?
Yeah.
R&R? No.
No, it was just...
My unit had no R&R. Mostly because there wasn't enough of them. Then when there was more, we were assigned to other places where they didn't have anybody. At least to my knowledge, there may have been R&R in other units. I don't know.
Okay. So, you mentioned earlier that you were injured, correct? Or just
Corpsman called them baby wounds.
baby wounds? Did you go through them, or did you just sort of push through the injuries that you had received?
Oh, I just got shrapnel in my hand, and on the west coast I got a mortar where my hearing was damaged, but nothing.
Nothing too serious.
No, this infected. I had trouble trying to load my rifle with an M1. You have to 8 bullets clip. You have to push it in with the thumb, pull it out, and it closes. And you have to be able to do that very fast. And they call M1 thumb when you're first learning that breech locks, and you have a pretty swollen thumb. Well, this was pretty bad. It was swollen pretty bad. So I had trouble loading it, but Corpsman didn't care. Nobody cared, and I survived.
Okay. So then, did anyone you know have a lot of R&R, or not like? So you mentioned that you went from the east coast to the west coast of the peninsula. Did you meet any other group units that had come back with news from what people felt was happening in the United States?
No.
No. So, what did you receive any letters from home or send any back?
Very few. My folks didn't write. And of course I couldn't write for a while because I couldn't use my thumb.
Okay.
When you're on the line, you're on it maybe 30, 60 days. You don't have any change of clothes, you don't have a shower, you don't have a bathroom. You stink something terrible. Food is sparse because to try and get C rations, which is a box stamp made in 1942 for World War II, but it was, good. Treat, one of them had a candy bar, and I didn't smoke, so I had a little cigarette, so if a guy smoked, I'd trade my cigarettes for his candy bars, which were pretty stale and bad. Once they pull you off the lines, you're relieved. You get to have a hot shower off the lines, and hot food, and a new uniform, dungarees, and then you go back up when your turn comes.
How often were you on leave? Like, for how many days?
That varied according to the assignment. Sometimes 30 days, sometimes 60 days. You smelled really ripe then. Sometimes shorter. It depended.
Okay. And how long would leave last usually?
How long would it last?
Yeah, like would you just have a day or two of leave?
Oh
and go
no,
back?
no, 30 days. You're on the line for 30 days or 60 days or whatever. As a private or a corporal or sergeant, you have no saying. You don't know what's going on. You're just given an assignment. Blind faith, I don't know what it is. But if you go up there, I used 30 days. It might have been 26. It might have been 35. But whenever you're relieved, you're ready to go.
Okay. Do you know what leaders you served under? What generals?
What was that?
Do you know who you served under? Like what general?
Oh, the general? No, I don't. There was quite a few of them. I know, get a certain age, memory fades. I know the one Marine Corps general that won every medal there was. I wasn't under MacArthur.
Okay.
I can't remember the generals. I can't remember the lieutenant's name. Now you realize that when you go on the lines, the officers take their brass off because snipers will get them right away. The first thing you do is you give your lieutenant. I've never seen anything higher than a captain on the lines. I've never seen a major or a colonel or a general. Just a lieutenant, usually a second lieutenant, and if he lives long enough, he'll make a first lieutenant. If he can live 90 days. And they take their brass off, and we nickname them, just like we nickname our corpsman. Because if you're wounded and you yell corpsman and he gets up, sniper will get him right away. You never salute on the lines. You never recognize or make any motion that an officer is there because a sniper will get him too. So you give them a nickname, and they come.
Okay. And then what years did you serve? Like, were enlisted from,
I went to Korea June of 51, came back June of 52.
Okay. During your time on the lines, could you have a sense of if you were winning or if they were winning, or did it seem more of a give and go?
It just was, we take some ground, they take some ground. They'd try and hit us, we'd hold them off. It got so heavy. They had a lot of men. I respected the Chinese fighter, not so much the North Korean fighter. He was good too, but the Chinese fighter, talk about blind faith. They'd just come and just keep coming, and our machine guns would be firing. We even pushed our barbed wire so it would curve in so that when they were coming, they wouldn't know, and they'd come in close and we could cut them down faster. It's hard to understand, and yet our lieutenant won the Navy Cross, which is the highest commendation for leading us 1,000 yards ahead of the line. I don't know what makes guys do that. I don't know. It's unity. We felt very close. We felt we couldn't be defeated, although we lost a lot of people and got defeated on a lot of fights.
Okay. So, did you encounter any civilians, and what were those, if any, experiences like?
I went through a village one time. I entered in, and there was a woman there. I didn't kill her. I let her go, but she might have killed the Marine behind me. I don't know. Most of the villages were vacant when we took them. And the towns I went through were gutted, so we didn't see any towns to speak of.
Okay. Do you remember what the village looked like?
A little adobe mud hut with some straw on top.
Okay.
And they had floors, and that's the way they kept them warm. They heated underneath the floors. Put the wood, and that heated the adobe, I guess it was adobe floor, wood floor. Couldn't have been wood floor with fire. I don't know. Didn't see it that close.
Okay. So you mentioned the hills that you saw from both the east and the west. Can you sort of describe what the landscape was like?
East Coast was timber, high mountains, very rugged. If you saw those pictures, you can see how rugged it is. The West Coast was pretty much flat with rice land. Rained a lot.
Okay. Can you go through what your daily routine would be most days, or if that varied from day to day?
I don't think you knew Monday from Sunday or any other day. I couldn't even told you what month it was in most cases. You sat in your foxhole, low, day and night. You stayed awake when you had to. If you moved over to the bunker where the machine guns were, you at least stand up a little bit. It was very boring, long, drawn out.
So, when you say bunker, is that more of a defense, or not, more of a armored spot compared to a foxhole?
Yeah, foxhole is just a hole in the ground that you lay in. Sometimes you can dig it deep enough to sit up and such. Our bunkers were where our machine guns were. We had, like I said, 330s and 250s, 50 at each end for firepower. And they brought, if you ever seen a metal landing strip that they put down for temporary, we brought those in along with big lumber braces and trees. And you dug down, put that over the top, and then put layers of dirt so it would, an artillery shell wouldn't go into it unless it hit it dead on. And it would hold maybe 3 or 4 people. A friend of mine dug in the side so you could sleep at night if you're lucky enough to be in there. And he survived. His name was Gene Garcia from Woodland. He's dead now. Chinese broke through the lines and machine gunned everybody in there. He was sleeping in on the side, and he survived. But it stayed with him.
So, you mentioned earlier, so when you were going on assignments, how did you feel like sort of not knowing exactly what was going to happen, just sort of trusting that everything was going to go all right or according to plan, or did you not expect everything to go according to plan?
You don't have any hope, you just go.
Okay.
Just stay as alert as you can, because you're very tired. Actually undernourished, I suppose.
Okay. So in your group, in your unit, you talked about being close with everyone. Did you form any close relationships with a few people in specific?
You're very close to the guys that you're protecting. I mean, you were with these guys until they either left and went home or were killed. When a new guy came in, you didn't really make friends because it's hard to lose a friend. You trusted him, you met him, but you tried not to be a close friend to him. I think it would have been nice if you went over a unit and stayed as a unit, because I see these other guys, like I said before, with the reunions. And the reunion that I went to, I didn't know anybody.
Yeah. How did you cope with losing someone that you were close to and that you trusted?
Well, you feel bad, but you develop a, I don't know what it is, but you know that you can't do anything about it. And when you know you can't do anything about something, you just live with it. When I came home, they dumped us on Treasure Island. And my folks happened to be there. They notified my folks, so I went home. They gave me 30 days liberty. And I couldn't stand it in the house. I went outside in the backyard and slept because I was nervous in the house. You got a year of no running water, no bathroom, and no shelter. It takes a while to adjust.
So you brought in a few items. Would you like to talk about them?
I just brought him in because I told Kathy that she said she wanted to see something about combat. You don't usually talk about combat, but apparently I've been blabbing like crazy. Those are just articles out of the Marine Corps League magazine that I thought would show you something what it's like, because it's hard to explain.
Would you like to show the camera?
Nah.
Okay. So when you had R&R, or when you had leave, what sort of things would you do to pass the time if you got bored, or even in the foxhole?
You never got leave.
No.
Never got R&R.
No.
Not the front lines. They brought you back to relieve you, feed you, scrub you, and then you went out on practice missions behind the lines so you could stay alert and such. And then when it came your turn to go back and relieve the other guys on the lines, you went. We didn't. Our infantry unit didn't get R&R or anything like that.
Okay. So like you mentioned that some days you would get bored, waiting around. What would you use to pass time, or were you always alert and always
You have to
watching?
be always alert, but you're bored. There's nothing to do. No TV, no magazines. Can't light a fire to get warm. You try and stay awake all night, take turns. You're pretty sure that your buddy's awake when you're asleep. It's very boring.
Okay.
Try and stay warm when it's cold. Try and cool off when it's warm. And try and stay dry. Try and keep your feet dry. An extra pair of socks is always handy. Gloves, which we didn't get regular gloves. We're a little short of supply of food and ammunition.
Okay. So did you leave Korea before the war was the amnesty was signed?
Yes.
How
I think it was signed in June of '53. I left June of '52.
Yeah, okay.
As a matter of fact, I think they were just using, you know what a duck is? So
It's like
the
a sort of
one on wheels that floats.
yeah.
They're just bringing those in on the Imjin River up there to carry some of the troops across it. That's where we're stationed, pretty close to that.
Okay.
And they use the amphibious tractors. I never got back to the tractors once I got back on the lines, but they used the tractors to break the ice on the river so that the enemy couldn't come across, because you can't swim in that icy water, but you can walk on the frozen. So they broke the ice and stopped them from slowed down their invasions.
Okay. When you're in your time in Korea and in the foxholes, was there any air attacks like in the foxholes near you or on yours? Air raids, bombings.
By them?
Yeah.
Airplanes?
Yeah.
No. They had what they called, can't remember the first, but something Charlie. They called him Charlie. It was like a little piper, and he'd come over once in a while and try and drop a bomb by hand. And we kind of laughed about that, because it very seldom ever hurt anybody. But we had good air support with that. That I don't think I'd be here. We had P-51s. I don't know if you can go back that far. And I saw a P-51 Mustang coming in, strafing to drop napalm. Or no, he was strafing. Wait a minute. I think the P-51 was going to drop napalm, and somehow or other jet was coming the other way. And luckily, they have just barely missed each other. But we had good air support, except that I understand that the Marines our air unit was put under the Army, and the Army didn't go for the close strafing in the napalms, and that's what saved us from getting overrun many times, because the Chinese came, when you heard the bugles and the whistles, you knew they were massing, and then you knew when they were coming, and you could smell the garlic sometimes. I didn't know Chinese ate garlic, but they tried to infiltrate at night. Sometimes you could get the scent. And we put our sea ration come in little tin cans, and we put that on our barbed wire. And if that hit, you knew that somebody was trying to crawl through to get to you. So we had little warnings like that. But without air support, Marine air support, and we had artillery on the East Coast from the ships, the Navy ships. We could call in artillery for support, and they were very accurate. And of course, we had our artillery behind us. And then they tried an experiment of having searchlights on cloudy nights, and it would reflect off the clouds and would help lighten up the front line where your enemy was, so that you could see better, and that way you wouldn't see the bushes you thought were people moving. But it only worked when they had good clouds. And that wasn't enough. It's hard to see in the dark.
Yeah.
But you're always listening, you're always smelling, you're always awake. If you're not awake, you won't wake up next day.
Okay. Were you ever shelled, either accidentally or as a strategy from your own side?
I wasn't, no. But I know units were. The coordinates, I guess, were off and came in short.
Okay. So you came back home a year before the war ended. How did you feel while you were back home?
Very bitter. I'm a poor veteran. I joined the VFW and I joined the American Legion, and I didn't care for it, so I didn't go. I joined the Marine Corps League, and I dropped out of that too. I'm not active in anything like that. I came back and put back in Pendleton and started digging foxholes again. Practice. It was a year of uselessness. It's just ridiculous to bring a guy. Could have put us as a gate guard or a prison chaser or something besides infantry practice. Most of the guys I know, we had a little trouble. That's why I didn't make sergeant. Came back late from leave, got broken. Almost every guy I knew in the unit that came back did the same thing. You just there's no reason to be digging foxholes again here at Pendleton. 20-mile hikes on Monday morning, and it makes you a little bitter. And then when I got discharged, I walked the streets for months trying to find a job. The recession, and finally got a job working at Spreckle Sugar, shoveling coke into a lime kiln, and I knew I was going to go back to college after that just as soon as I could.
Okay. So when you came back to Camp Pendleton, you said you were on infantry practice. Was that sort of just re-preparing you to go back in if you were necessary?
Same practice I was doing before I went over.
Okay.
A little bit lighter. Didn't have the guerrilla thing. Didn't have the steady firing range and such. But amphibious tractors, attacking the beach and that kind of stuff.
Okay. So then, after you were discharged, or before you were discharged, did you receive any awards during that time period?
No.
Okay. So then, what sense did you feel from the American people when you were back in the U.S.?
Most people didn't know we were gone. It was a forgotten war. I went home to Woodland and saw people, and they didn't even know I was gone.
How did that make you feel?
Pretty disgusted. A little discouraged.
Okay. So would you say like that most of the country, or like that you went over there and people sort of just thought you sort of just moved on? Not many people knew about the war.
I don't quite understand.
Like, from what you like sort of felt when you came back, did it seem like people didn't know that there was a war going on?
No, they didn't. No. Nobody ever asked me anything about it. Of course, I never said anything about it. Nobody mentioned Korea.
Okay. So how did your family welcome you back coming in?
I didn't know that they were notified, but they were notified that I was coming into Treasure Island. The guys from California got off the ship in Treasure Island. The others were shipped down to San Diego. It had to be a monumental task by the Marine Corps to do that. And I came down the gangplank and my parents were there, which was really a good feeling.
So you did you eventually go back to college after
Yeah.
you
Night school.
high school?
Yeah. Took me 10 years. Got into law school. By that time I had a wife and 2 children, and so I didn't finish law school. I met my wife. Good thing about the Marine Corps, I have to say, and I'm proud to have been a Marine, but I don't consider myself a really good Marine because I don't have this gung-ho feeling. But I met my wife on a blind date in Malibu Beach. Yeah, it could have been the best thing ever happened to me. We've been married 59 years. So something good came out of the Marine Corps for me.
So earlier you mentioned that it was hard to find work. Where did you eventually be able to find work? And how long
Well,
did it take?
in those days you didn't have unemployment. I think it was 3 or 6 months before you could draw unemployment. So I had no money at all except my discharge money. And so in those days you had to have a little piece of paper that said you had contacted 6 people that week for work. And so that was pretty easy to do. I just went door to door. And finally, Spreckle Sugar, I don't think you're probably too young. Spreckle Sugar was probably one of the bigger sugar beet factories in Woodland. And they have what they call campaigns during the season where they're harvesting. And so I got a job there, which was the bottom of the thing, shoveling coke into a lime kiln. I wore out my Marine Corps boots and about 3 shovels. And I worked 2 campaigns there. They called them campaigns. And finally I got back into college and trying to think of the other jobs I had. Can't think of what they were, but I had enough drafting experience in college that I finally got a job at Lockheed Aircraft down in Burbank as a detailed draftsman and trainee. And every Monday you went to school, so it was good training. So at least I got that.
Okay. Coming back, did you feel like it was hard to transition from military life to civilian life?
I suppose it was. Being a little bitter anyway and not finding a job didn't help. But I didn't do anything like the Vietnam vets where they seemed to turn to dope or alcohol or something. You had no choice. There was no help. Marine, military, the government, nobody helped you. You just had to survive. And so we didn't know any different, I guess. And I adjusted. A little bitter, but adjusted.
Would you say that your military, that your training of survival helped push you, or not push you, but helped you through the time of being able to say, I need to keep moving forward? And
probably did, because you get the attitude that you either do it or you don't survive. You do what you have to do, and you forget about the rest. I know I didn't want to get a job as an instructor in anything military. I remember my first time I was home, a friend of mine wanted to go deer hunting. I went deer hunting and I couldn't kill the deer. So I came back and put my rifle in the closet, and it's been there all these years. Should have sold it, but I didn't.
So you said earlier that you joined the American Legion and
The VFW, Veterans of Foreign Wars, yeah. And the Marine Corps League.
yeah.
I felt it was a duty, but I couldn't handle the meetings.
Okay.
Good friend of mine, John Camacho, was the president of the Marine Corps League, and he and I were in the same unit, Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 1st Marines, and we never saw each other. He was my neighbor. I went to school with him. When we were in Korea, never saw him. Now that shows you how hidden you are. And he's dead now too.
Okay. So how else has your wartime experience like helped you through like your life experience? Like, have you found a point in your life where you said and reflected that this is something that you experienced over in Korea?
No, no, I don't think so. I learned to take orders. I mean, I've worked for some bosses that I hated their guts, but I worked and never said anything to them. That might have helped in the Marine. That, you know, in the Marine Corps, you can't talk back to a sergeant. Um, you can't disobey an order. A lieutenant can get you in trouble if you think you gave him a dirty look. So you learn that way. Now, I don't know about the military now. I think you got rights now that you didn't have then. But I don't have good memories, but I had good friends of the Marine Corps. I'm proud to have been a Marine, and I'm proud of my country. I'm too old to go back in the service again, but thank goodness.
Is there anything else you would like to add that we haven't talked about previously?
Not that I came here not knowing really what you wanted, except that Kathy wanted me to speak about
Okay.
a little bit about combat. Not too bad, but be polite about it.
Okay.
It's hard to explain combat,
Yeah.
and that's why I've refused other ones.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming out here and taking your time to talk with us.
Yeah, I appreciate being talked to.
Well, thank you.